You've got 10 seconds. The countdown going on right now. I'm sorry, I'm not doing it the wrong way.
This is Play-by-Playcast, the world's #1 sports media podcast. Wait, what?
Nobody's fact-checking it. Just keep going.
Here we go.
Who the hell is Happy Gilmore?
Got all that on camera, right, John?
Sure, I did.
All right, because the red light was not on.
The podcast about play-by-play broadcasters for play-by-play broadcasters, hosted by a play-by-play broadcaster.
Oh, you can stick me in some kind of Italian boat because that one is gondola.
Now, from New York, really?
All the big ones are from New York.
Your host, Joe Godet.
It's still Joel.
Yeah, he will not be able to see very well, Cotton.
Oh, yeah, that is right. It's everything you didn't ask for and then more. Brand new open here on Play-by-Playcast. Thanks as always for the subscribe, the stream, the download. We are officially on episode number 151 of the podcast. My name is Joel Godet. This is the podcast about play-by-play broadcasters for play-by-play broadcasters, hosted by a play-by-play broadcaster. It's a professional development podcast that dives into the tips, tricks, experience, process, stories, and preparations of some of the biggest and best play-by-play announcers in the business. 150 episodes in, 151 now. Figured I'd freshen things up a little bit. Little new imaging. Throw some Brockmeyer at you and some Ron Burgundy. All of, the legitimate broadcasters out there that we profile. Thanks as always for joining us. You can find the pod on social media at PXPcast. I'm at Joel Godet, JoelGodett. Ben Wagner of the Toronto Blue Jays is our guest this week. And a couple of interesting points going into this conversation. The first of which was just like total coincidence. Sometimes people will say, speak something into existence. I think that's like a self-help thing. You have to, hey, if you want something, speak it into existence. Had this conversation with Ben that you're about to listen to on Tuesday of this week. And at the end of the conversation, and we're going to talk about Vladdy Jr. In what you're about to hear, but at the end of the conversation, I said to Ben, how's Vlad doing? What's he look like? How is he handling the majors? And if he doesn't hit, would they, I was just curious, would they, with a prospect of his magnitude and all the hubbub, would they dare send him back to AAA if, he was still batting 190 after X number of games? And, Ben and I then joked, and Ben said, well, hey, of course, he hasn't hit a home run yet, but in one of the biggest parks in baseball, it would be poetic if he hit his first tonight, wouldn't it? So, of course, he hit his first and his second on Tuesday night. Welcome to the show, Vlad Guerrero Jr. I don't think we have to worry about him going much of anywhere. Ben Wagner and I go back a long way, though. He was my first professional boss, as a matter of fact. I worked for Jason Benetti when I was in Salem with the Salem Avalanche, now the Red Sox. But that was, I was still in college. It was technically an internship. I don't think I got credit or paid for it. It was really kind of volunteer work. But the first time I got paid, my first true boss was Ben Wagner back in the summer of 2009 when I was the number 3 broadcaster with the Buffalo Bisons. I did middle innings on select road games, and I filled in for Ben when he went over to TV for select home games, and I lived with him for a couple of months. Maybe it was only 1 month. I ate fondue out of the fondue pot because I'm a chocoholic. Couple days after we had used it. Ben was a really good boss and a really good guy to work with and learn from. And it was awesome for him that last year he got the call up to replace Jerry Howarth as a member of the Toronto Blue Jays broadcast team. So good conversation here with Ben about his path and how he calls a game, dealing with Vlad Jr., and a host of other things. But where I wanted to start with Ben this week, and why I really wanted to have a baseball guy on the podcast, is something I've been thinking about for a couple of weeks. Ball State baseball has some really good pitchers this year. Our Friday night guy is a guy by the name of Dre Jameson. He's 5'9" and 160 pounds and throws 97. He doesn't exist in nature. He'll be a first-round draft pick. He's got a couple million coming his way. So, he's pretty dominant. Struck out 16 the other week. And it's always difficult to hit him. He's hard. He has the issue of he takes no-hitters deep into games sometimes. John Baker, who follows him as our Saturday starter, has allowed 5 singles in the last 3 weeks. That's it. And leads the Mid-American Conference in ERA for a starter. He, too, has taken some no-hitters pretty deep into ball games this year. So it just got me thinking, and Chase Antle, who was a Bowling Green pitcher who's had a fine season, up and down, he against Ball State took a no-hitter into the fifth inning a couple of weeks ago. So it just got me thinking as to what we do as broadcasters when it comes to talking about no-hitters and what the unwritten rules are for us as broadcasters. I have always been of the ilk that you call the game. Like, if somebody's driving in the car and they turn on the radio, they don't want it danced around. I want to know that somebody's throwing a no-hitter. If I'm tuning into the game, you need to make me want to listen. I want to listen if it's a no-hitter. I don't necessarily want to listen if I get into the car and I have to think about the way that you've wound me through the fact that it's a no-hitter. And I don't believe in broadcasters' jinxes. But I kind of started to the last couple of weeks because in Chase Antle's no-hit bid against Ball State, he was no-hit through 4. We came back in the 5th, and I started talking about the history of no-hitters at Bowling Green and how Oral Hershiser, I think, was the last one to throw a 9-inning no-hitter, and like 3 pitches later, the no-hitter was gone. John Baker, a couple of weeks ago, had a no-hitter into the 7th inning. And the first time I actually said the word no-hitter was in the 7th inning, and he lost it. I hadn't danced around it, but I'd alluded to it. I'd said he hasn't given up a hit. I'd said he'd given up 3 walks and nothing else. I think I said, I think I was pretty blunt. I think I said at one point, Northern Illinois has no hits through 6 or through 5, but I never said the word no-hitter. And then the second I mentioned no-hitter, it got broken up like a batter later. So I started to think about, maybe I actually do have a broadcaster's jinx in the back of my mind. And then this past week, when Ball State took on Ohio, John Baker did it again. He actually threw a no-hitter this time. It was pretty cool. It was the 3rd time I've called a no-hitter in my career for the team I was working for. Randy Fontanez for the University of South Florida in 2010. Nick Tepesh and Jimmy Reyes for the Myrtle Beach Pelicans in 2012, and John Baker and Lucas Jaksic for Ball State this past Saturday. And again, I danced around it, and they have no hit, whatever. But I never said the word no hitter until late in the game, and then they still threw a no hitter. So all's well that ends well, no jinx. But I did have somebody tweet at me and say that I was brave for having mentioned the word no hitter. Tweet at us if you have any stories, at PXPcast. I'm curious the thoughts of everyone out there. Do you say no-hitter? When do you say no-hitter? I always joke. I think every first inning. If a pitcher gets through a first inning, 1, 2, 3, I think I almost always, or 1 out of every 3 games, we'll go to break. Dre Jameson, perfect game intact as we go to the 2nd. But at that point, it's kind of jocular. What are your thoughts? Let us know at PXPcast. I'm at Joel Godet on how you describe no-hitters and the approach that you take. Sue me. If I said no-hitter and you lost a no-hitter, maybe I said it too loud and you heard me from the booth. Or from the mound. It is what it is. I'm just of the ilk that we are information vessels. And the information that is important in that moment is saying the fact that a no-hitter is happening. That's where I actually start this conversation with Ben Wagner, though, because he has called no-hitters in his career, including one by a Canadian in Canada against the Blue Jays. So we'll talk about that. That's actually where our conversation starts this week with Ben Wagner from the Toronto Blue Jays on episode number 151 of Play-by-Playcast. What is the Ben Wagner rule of handling no-hitters?
After 6. And I think I've leaned on this more so recently, even with the Blue Jays' offensive struggles, where there have been frequent games. We're talking double-digit games where there are no hit through 3, and the offense has been anemic. But it gets real when you bring it up in terms of conversation and the fact that a guy has a chance at it, I think, after 6. Because now you're down to needing 9 outs. It just becomes much more of a frenzy pace in social media. The in-game alerts come in. I think it becomes real after 6. So I'll start to really lean on the fact of the broadcast and telling fans more of a sense of urgency that after 6, it becomes a big thing.
Will you acknowledge it, though, like in the 4th or the 5th, and be like, after 5, the Blue Jays have no runs on no hits? Or is that just
because...
like, or is it like when you say the magic word no-hitter is after 6?
Yeah, I think the magic word no-hitter comes after 6, or if there's a case where there's been a couple of walks and there are no hits in the 4th, right? The Blue Jays have only had 2 base runners in this game, and they're being no-hit by player X. I think it's easy. It is our job. Bottom line is, it's our job.
True.
And if that piques the ears a little bit of a listener or somebody that's casually tuning in, and it may not even be the opponent's fan or a Blue Jay fan that's tuning in, it may gain their interest and keep them next to the radio or on their earbuds for an extra 15 to 20 minutes until that first hit happens. Or when they see it on the byline, maybe later that night on MiLB Network, for example, and be like, oh, I tuned into that game. When did they get that hit? And then they go back and they do a little research. It builds, maybe in a very small way, it connects fans and maybe has a larger scope of it. I know as a listener and somebody that's a radio nerd, I just love to tune into a ball game and find out 1 or 2 nuggets right away of why I should continue listening to this game. And if it's a fact where a guy's got a perfect game or there's a milestone that is approaching, that's just something that's important to me, and they hold my interest.
I'm always one of those guys, too, that, like, when there's a first hit in, like, the first inning, I'm always like, well, and there goes the no-hitter for the day. So, like, I think about it immediately. Like, immediately when you get through the first inning, I'm like, oh, well, okay, no hits. All right, we're on our way here. How about when it happens against you? So, I've heard the John Paxson call, and it's different, obviously, because you're a Canadian, you're a broadcaster for a Canadian team, and he was a Canadian who did it in Canada. But how do you handle broadcasting a historic moment like that when it's the Blue Jays who will inevitably be very unhappy that night?
And they were. That was May 8th, 2017. I'm 36 games into my major league career, and this is what's kind of rolled out in front of me. All right, big boy, let's see how you handle this test. And it's James Paxton. It's on native soil. It's at the Rogers Center. It's a Blue Jays team that had overperformed, I think, at the beginning of the season and was somewhat of a surprise where they were. And all of a sudden, it's always a storyline anytime James Paxton pitches in Canada, let alone has any sort of success like he had that night. Once the crowd got behind it later in the ball game, I felt much more comfortable in terms of what I was able to relay, the energy behind it for that moment. There have been other moments that have flirted with no-hitters and perfect games deep into ball games that I've been way less excited, so to speak. But I'm also of the caliber of big moments are big in the game. Exciting things are exciting, and they have to live, and they have to be within the moment. I don't think as a broadcast voice of a major league team or an NBA team or whatever, that you should automatically go into homer mode and be so depressed and so, anti-reactionary with that moment, especially if you're the road team, because the crowd behind you is going absolute bananas in these big moments, and you have to convey that energy that you're witnessing. And that's what makes broadcasting live sports so incredible, to be in the arena or be at the ballpark or at the field when these things happen.
How many have you called in your career?
I have called 2 no-hitters. The first was combined, and the second was the James Paxton no-hitter. And the first, you have to go all the way back to A-ball, when the Lexington Legends combined for a no-hitter at First Energy Park in Lakewood, New Jersey.
Was it anybody good?
You know what? That I actually don't remember, but I believe Hunter Pence was on that team. So this is how far back we're going. Yeah. I remember the Blue Claws team that year was really good and had a number of names that people would know right now, including Carlos Carrasco, who's having an amazing career with the Cleveland club and has gone on to do just really cool things. Jay Happ was part of that too. But those teams in Lakewood in the early days had notable names, no real big moments outside the Lexington Legends rolling into town combining for the no-no.
What at what point do you start thinking about, if this happens, this is kind of something I want to say? And I only ask it from the standpoint of, and we've had this conversation on the podcast before many times, and I'm always of the ilk of like, whatever comes out is what comes out, and don't think about it because you'll ruin it. But I'm doing this game on Saturday, and I sent it to break, and I said, it was the first no-hitter, 9 innings in Ball State history, and I said, like, one for the history books, Lucas Jaksic, you're going to want to save that baseball. And, like, as I sent it to break, I was like, gosh, damn, that would have been great to save for the final out. I was like, I really wish I would have thought of that earlier. Do you put any thought into what might come out for a big moment of a situation like that?
Not pregame, but I think as games are going on, you're looking at all the factors around it. I'll reference a couple of plays that were made in that game against the Mariners, and there was a diving grab at third base. There was another big play, if I remember, that were not early, but kind of in the middle of the game. And you just had a sense the way that he was working and kind of just the rhythm of where the Blue Jays were that night at the plate, their approach, and just watching Paxton work, that you think, like, oh my God, that could be one of the turning points of this game. And then that seed is planted. And, there are a number of things that from Canadian baseball history, these things just don't happen. And when something good for a Canadian-born player happens, it makes national news. And you want your call, I think, to resonate with fans across the board, the broad strokes of it, right? So as that's going on, I'm not going to lie. I mean, yeah, I thought about the moment. I wasn't sure, and you're never sure in baseball, too, how that final out's coming. It could be a strikeout. It could be a cue shot off the end of the bat that dribbles to the second baseman, or it could be a play at the wall, that seals the deal. And all of that has to get, one, relayed with clarity, but then you got to wrap it up and put a bow on it. It'd be great if the guy comes in and throws 97 miles an hour and just blows away the side. And, you can just kind of amplify the call as you get to that point. But that's just not how baseball works, ever. So, I mean, I think for me, I wanted to make sure I had my facts right. As that game was building on, we have an incredible resource with the Stats Inc. and Sportsnet Stats. So you're getting all these nuggets, just jamming your text stream on Twitter, on email, and I'm trying to just keep my mind wrapped up within the 90-second break as the Blue Jays are coming up in the bottom of the ninth. So there's a checklist of things that I'm thinking about, not necessarily even related to the call. There's a couple of things that I want to make sure I've got down in my own mind where I can capsulize the moment and make it good for the medium. And hopefully, be proud of the call at the end of the day. I want my work to be something I'm proud of. So that's a really long-winded way to say I don't necessarily script out how I'm going to call a final out, of course, but there are certain things I think you have to just go through as a broadcaster to make sure you encapsulate the moment and are able to relay it from your chair, wherever you're viewing this game, and get it out to the masses.
Let me, I'll come back to, I want to put that on a larger scope, but I'll come back to that. I want to go like 30,000-foot view now, where we usually start with people. And that is that before you got to the Blue Jays to be one of the voices of Toronto, you spent 14 years in the minors. What were those 14 years like? And at what point did you think to yourself, like, man, is this going to happen?
Because that happened multiple times. I think, in 14 years of minor league baseball, there were a couple of different phases where coming out of college, I had this vision of going into minor league baseball to, one, encompass a resume that would make me marketable if broadcasting didn't work out. Broadcasting in professional baseball didn't work out as well. I think there's two ways to look at that. Some of the career advice that I got immediately, if you didn't want to go into local TV, local radio, and I'm talking like small market stuff like Terre Haute, Syracuse, Indiana, that kind of small market. I was more of a realist. I didn't think that I had any shot in the world at the time of getting my first job in Indianapolis or any medium-sized market, whether it be TV or radio. So I wanted to go into sports. I thought that I could be, and I felt more comfortable working with the team on a day-to-day basis. And that stemmed from my relationships that I was able to build in the athletic department and the fun that I had covering baseball in the years prior. And somebody gave me some career advice, be like, oh, you should go to the winter meetings and submit your tape and resume. And some of the people said, now you're going to have to do 55 jobs, and actually calling the game ranks 55th on that job list. But what you're going to walk away from the first couple of years being a professional and hired in the sports industry is you're going to learn a lot about marketing. You're going to learn a lot about sales. You're going to learn a lot about media and PR. All of these drivers that as a 22, 23, 24-year-old, I thought would make me much more inviting, lucrative for that next stop. If it's a number one or a number two of a team, or if it's jumping into small market radio and television where I could have, just a little bit of business acumen, that would pay off big dividends. And that's why minor league baseball was my choice. And went in as a number two in Lakewood. Things worked out in my favor. I got hired as the number one right after that first year. And in that first off season, after my first year full time, I was a finalist for a AAA job. And I thought, oh my gosh, maybe I do have a future in broadcasting baseball. So that gave me a lot of confidence. Where I fell short in round one in that position, I thought, okay, I'm going to keep my nose to the grindstone, keep chugging away, try to move up to AA or AAA, what have you. And I got some good feedback, on those first couple of reels in baseball. And baseball people kind of liked what I was doing and how I conducted myself. So I took that as a lot of confidence behind the scenes as well. And in the late winter, early spring of 2007 is when Jim Rosenhaus got promoted to the Indians. And blindly, I had no inside track on this whatsoever. I applied to Buffalo, and my tape and my resume just kept getting through the different phases. And after a couple of phone interviews and a sit-down one-on-one in Buffalo at the front office, they tapped me on the shoulder and they said, okay, you're our guy. And I guess that's, peel back layer one, with the confidence of trying to get to AAA, getting to AAA, which for me too was a big jump because Buffalo, I didn't realize it at the time. I knew they were an incredibly successful organization. They have wonderful ownership, and they still have wonderful ownership. But also the fact with how Buffalo was regarded within the baseball community, I wasn't fully aware of until I got the job, and baseball people were calling me, telling me how much of a great jump this is going to be for me personally and professionally. And Buffalo turned out to be every bit of that. Fast forward, 10, 11 years. But with Buffalo, too, came other things where I thought I could expand my resume and do mid-major college basketball on radio and on television with the regional sports network that was already established there. And I thought, okay, now I can pad my resume and do other stuff on top of baseball. And I was trying to do that the first off season. And within 2008 to 2009 was my first opportunity to become a finalist with a major league opportunity. And I thought, okay, this is another encouraging step in my career. It was incredibly demoralizing when I found out that I didn't get the job. But again, relatively soon after getting one rung higher on the ladder, you think about your professional and personal goals and what you really want to hone in on. And after going through that first process and the feedback that I got from the team, people that I was working with, plus then the reels that followed, I really thought I had a shot. I really did. And that became my number one focus of not only becoming a better broadcaster, but trying to get to the major leagues and do that. And you fall short on a couple of opportunities or jobs you really think that you're qualified for and you want. And it sucks. It's incredibly frustrating. And it happened to me a couple of times. And there was one specific incident where I thought I nailed everything. I nailed the phoner. I nailed the sit down. I nailed the gamut of going to that team's front office and sitting with 9 different people and going through the hours of peppering of questions and situations and scenarios. And you fall short on that. And I was crushed, man. I was reevaluating what I was doing because you felt like you did everything right. And at the end of the day, and it has nothing to do with the direction that they went either, but at the end of the day, you're just wondering if you're continuing to do it right and if it would ever happen. And I got a couple of pep talks, and I got a shot on the chin, and I got some encouragement, from friends and family. And ultimately, you just stick with it. And then a couple of years later, again, timing is everything with everything. And, Jerry Howarth announced his retirement a couple of weeks away from spring training beginning and broadcast starting within days. And the Blue Jays had to cover their broadcast roster to get off the ground in spring training. And they never took my badge away. So it worked out. And, here I am. But those are the multiple layers, right? Those are the multiple layers of plotting out what you want for your career, what you want for personal development, and the breaks that come along the way. And as frustrating as a lot of that stuff is, it never outweighed the good that was happening for me in Buffalo and ultimately now in the GTA.
How did, over those, particularly the 11 years in Buffalo, so you've arrived in AAA, and I'm sure at that point you're 4 years into a minor league career and you're saying, like, I am here. How did you most improve, and where did you most need to improve in that decade to get yourself from being a guy that can get that Buffalo Bisons job to being a guy that is taken seriously at that next level when people start to look to fill major league vacancies?
I think more importantly is how you relate with the people in the clubhouse and the coaching staff and in the minor leagues, the rovers that come through. You have to treat people like people. And I think as many resources as the internet and blogs and everything can provide you, I think you get a lot of work done by just working the walls of the clubhouse, especially in baseball, where you're present. You're in front of the players. You ask sometimes the tough baseball questions on good days and bad days, but also the fact where there are some days where you just need to disappear because they need their space, and you have to have that feel. And I think over the course of AAA and seeing the good of somebody going up to the major leagues for their debut and everybody that's eager to talk about that, you also have to be sensitive of the bad news too, because for everybody that goes up, somebody's got to come down. And I think feeling out those relationships and knowing how to orchestrate myself in a professional manner is something that I know I grew in those 10 years. And you do it with maturity as a person too, from the time you turn 25, 26 to the time you turn 35, 36 and 37 and now 38. You have a better feel of how to build those relationships too. On the air, you're constantly trying to improve and call things different and keep it fresh for you, the broadcaster, and build up the X's and the O's. And there are good days and bad days, just like everybody has good days and bad days in the office, I believe. And you just try to weed out those bad days and keep them as strong as you can and crisp as you can. So in my mind, I structure my day. And this is another thing that I learned in the minors, especially in Buffalo. In my mind, I needed to be at my best for those 3 to 4 hours that were on the air. And if that meant sleeping in till 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, and I'm not a big time late afternoon or nap guy or late morning sleeper, I had to restructure my day and kind of my approach to shut off the phone, turn off the laptop or whatever, and make sure that you were prepared mentally and physically to be your best for those hours that you're on the air. And I think, making sure that you could do that helped me grow leaps and bounds, especially the last few years on the broadcast.
Where did your sound most improve? What did you think, just from an on-air standpoint, where did you get the most better? Where did you improve most in those 3 or 4 years?
I think pacing ultimately helps, where you're just not trying to ramrod information down people's throats. If you're fortunate enough to have 2, 3, 4 games in a series, because you don't get to it on game 1, it'll still be there in game 3 or 4 of that set. And that was something that I really had to appreciate and understand the pace of the game too. And in those final few years, working with Duke, who had played professionally, loves the game, keeps his pulse on the game, and as passionate as he is about good baseball, understanding kind of the ebbs and the flows and what to look for within the game really helped me grow. So I think growing and talking the game with the players and the coaches and the Rovers that are coming through, having a little bit more sense of what actually happens within the game and the feel of the game by working with people that actually played the game, those were really big leaps for me personally and professionally. Again, that's what we were afforded with Duke. I get smaller sample sizes working with the Blue Jays and actually having a broadcaster / player in the booth, because most of the time our broadcast setup is 2 broadcasters versus having that player input. But to be able to pull back a little bit in the play-by-play and actually tell you a little bit about the X's and the O's, it just comes from that big circle of gathering all your information, having a feel of the game and enough knowledge where hopefully you're one of the smarter people, that are watching this game because you've done all your homework ahead of time. I think that combination helped me a lot.
How was it a change for you, too? Because most of us will always go through the minor leagues having not worked with a former player, somebody who has that perspective. We just work with another broadcaster. How did your outlook, your approach change when you realized you had Duke, who certainly can call a game and does do some innings, but that you could play off him a little bit for his expertise and his experience as opposed to just a guy sitting next to you who's also working his way up the ladder?
When you work with a former player, I think you are automatically allowed to have a bigger personality when you're on the air, because former players, to me, keep things lighthearted. They have some inside jokes. They have a vernacular that's automatically going to come out, in the baseball slang, and you can your inside jokes, your ability to kind of let loose a little bit is more. It's not more fun. Don't get me wrong, and I don't mean this to demean any booth that's got 2 broadcasters in it, and they have a good time. And like Mike and I have a good time too, because we believe fun things are fun, and we should have fun. But when a guy can laugh about a situation or a play as a former player, and you can give a one-liner or a quip about it too, I think that's just one. It sounds natural. If it sounds natural, it's going to feel natural from a listener standpoint. And the fact that if you've got a former player in there, you can draw all that stuff out. And you can, on radio, it's a little bit different because, you do want some sort of rhythm where you're not missing pitches and talking over pitches and that. But on TV too, it's an open medium where you can just cover up and backtrack and clean up the play. On radio, I come up and I make a point to be specific about questions if the game is dragging, or to draw this insight out of the player or the coach, that you're sitting next to. It's a totally different broadcast, but it's a very loose broadcast if you got guys that are comfortable on the air. And that's something too that you've got to learn, right? From a former player standpoint, guys that are really green, wearing a headset and not comfortable with their own sound on the air, to the guys that are really comfortable with their sound on the air, and then getting the insight in the background and making them tell stories and making them break down plays.
Answer this question very carefully. Who is the best partner you've ever had on the air?
Oh, man, it had to be that young guy early in my my Buffalo stop. Man, has he ever gone on to leaps and bounds?
I have no idea what he's doing now.
Yeah, the renowned voice of the Ball State Cardinals and host of this podcast.
He's great. What
was that year? 2009.
2009. It's been 10 years.
It was 2009, yeah.
God, that seems
a decade
like
of hits.
Oh my
Look
goodness.
at us.
Yikes. What's working with Dan Schulman like, though? Not a former player, but to have that guy by your side.
That guy by my side is from somebody that grew up listening to Dan and college basketball first, appreciating what then if you find him on the national mediums doing baseball and you try to have some career track in baseball, you realize immediately if you do our work, our broadcast, how incredibly good Dan Schulman is. when you're sitting next to him, it's hard not to be intimidated. You're like, holy crap, how did he see that? How did he know that? How in the world is he going about his day? So I tried to learn last year, and that was really fortunate for me to be in the big leagues for the first time and work almost 40 games shoulder to shoulder with Dan and see how he orchestrates the clubhouse, the field, the people behind the scenes. That was really impressive. Also knowing that now Dan's almost got 25 years of Major League broadcast experience, more than that, maybe coming up on 30, of Major League broadcast experience. That black book of his is unmatched, which is really awesome. Now, you're going to gain that automatically with experience, right? But if we had a question about another team on the air, he could fire off a text to maybe a coach, absolutely 100%, a PR person or somebody in the media that he's crossed paths with, and we instantaneously got an answer. So nobody blows off the call, nobody blows off the text. So if we had questions, we go to Dan, and he usually gets responses immediately. But to watch him work and watch him conduct his business, and how he also conducts the actual play-by-play calling is really incredible. And I'll give you a great example. For somebody that had an extensive experience in the minor leagues, where sometimes you even have a monitor in the booth, let alone don't have a monitor in the booth, in our minor league travels. And if you have a monitor, can you trust the college intern or high school student that's operating the camera to call the game or a bang play, that may or may not happen? In Buffalo, we were really fortunate with our camera crew. Other places, not so much. But Dan loves calling the majority of the game off the monitor. He's got extensive TV experience, obviously. But that was something that he really helped me grow to trust in the realm of broadcasting and relying on the monitor. And everywhere we go in the major leagues, you're going to have at least one monitor. And that's going to help you with pitch location, pitch tracking, bang plays, and just seesawing back and forth to try to call the action as well as you can by using all of the tools that are available. And that was something that you pick up and you learn and you watch them work in the booth. And that was really, really helpful for me going through year one and now implementing even more so and trusting it and ultimately relying on it in some cases in year two.
What's different about a major league ballpark, a major league clubhouse, a major league experience, and how did you get used to that in the early going? Like, I mean, I've been, I think, in one major league clubhouse in my life, and I about peed down my leg. And at that point, I'd been in plenty of minor league clubhouses. It's just it felt like a different vibe. How do you best adapt to that and still go about doing your job in the same fashion that you had been doing for more than a decade?
Everything is much more structured in the major leagues. Everything from your access to the time that you can sit down and even pop in a manager's office. There are relationships that you may have with a coach or a player or a manager, where it's easy to pop your head in the manager's office before the set time where he'll field questions or linger afterwards, where, it's in this buffer zone. If you want to ask a question, that's really, if you have those relationships, you're fortunate. But in year one, I was not prepared for how structured the day needed to be once you got to the ballpark, because you can only go in the clubhouse from a certain time. It starts at a certain time and it ends at a certain time. It's not only the media PR people that are looking out, the guys that orchestrate the operation of the clubhouse. If they see you lingering, they're like, hey man, clubhouse is closed. You got to get, and you have to abide by the rules. So I was not, from a minor league component, prepared. We can walk in the manager's office at 1:30 in the afternoon and be like, hey Skip, you got the lineup? Yeah, here it is. You take it. And now you hardly ever see a lineup printed on paper. You're relying on these stupid video boards that are dependent on multiple layers of people. Like the PR people have to send the lineup. In 2019, the PR people have to send the lineup to Vegas first, or the MiLB office. So it's housed in this network, and then it gets approval for posting, and then it comes back and you may see it in the media lounge first before you see it on the video boards in the clubhouse. I don't know. It's just this mess. The lineup is just a mess. But that is one of the key components of me starting my day. And I just want the lineup. I want to do my pregame interview, and then I want to go get the lineup in the book. So that's one of the biggest structure of my day components that I had to adjust and figure out how to operate my day with all these things that are circling around and happening, right? So the structure of the day, the time of the clubhouse and when you have access to the players, also a level of the comfort that you want to have on the field of play and when to approach a guy is a lot different than in the minor leagues too, where batting practice may only be a certain time and most guys are really comfortable with members of the media, the broadcast crew being around the cage. We're really fortunate in Toronto because Buck Martinez has a half century of playing and managing and coaching and broadcasting experience. Pat Tabler, who's been on the broadcast, for 25 years with the Blue Jays, and they're both former players, and they both conduct themselves extremely well around the cage with players and coaches. And with that comfort level, from my minor league experience to watching these guys, kind of set up the availability for somebody on the broadcast angle to be allowed around the cage. That was fortunate for me too. But year one to year two, I've done a number of different things. Well, those are going to be the same. Year two, looking back after year one, I found myself wasting a lot of time or wishing I was doing something else in that hurry up and wait mode. So while we are in hurry up and wait mode, if you're done with the clubhouse is closed, we have 10 to 15 minutes scheduled to meet with the manager. I'm doing the games on the iPad now, where I'm now putting in everything that I've been able to mine out of the clubhouse conversation or the batting practice stuff, and I'm going to scribble it in the sidebar of my scorebook and try to conduct myself a little bit more efficiently in the stages of my day to get up to the broadcast. Instead of being on the field wishing I was scribbling stuff in my scorebook upstairs, I can take those 10 or 15 valuable minutes that I'm kind of killing time and scribble it down so I'm not rushing to get every nugget off a scratch pad onto the scorebook for my game.
What's the difference when something like Vladimania happens and you now have to deal with that added wrench where there's a normal day and then there's every eye of the universe feels like it is on you for a little while type feeling?
There is nothing that compares to Vladdy Day. The sense of excitement, the buildup, the media crush, the amount of just absolute bodies that are surrounding the podium, the clubhouse, the dugout, out in front of the dugout, being around the batting cage and turning around, and Vladdy's sister and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Sr. are over my right shoulder. I thought, well, I need to move now. There's no day that is like a Vladdy day.
Was it more or less than the media for Ken Takahashi from Japan?
That's funny. Way more. You've got Ken Takahashi. You had even Mooney Kawasaki and some of the media contingent that would come down from Toronto to cover Mooney in Buffalo. I mean, nothing compares to what we have seen. Maybe in Los Angeles, you could compare it to the Ohtani and Ichiro contingents that have followed him around now for decades. That's the only thing that I think from an outside perspective.
But that's all Japanese media. This is.
It's all Japanese media, right? Yeah. And that's the thing too, where if you're talking about a Canadian base, American base, and really the Dominican Republic too had a massive contingent of broadcasters that were there, and the pressure that kid has felt over the last couple of weeks of his first major league experience, I can't imagine going through it at a 38-year-old perspective, let alone a 20-year-old perspective. And it's been a lot to deal with just from. It goes back to the structure, right? Where you're not going to have a Vladimir Guerrero Jr. scrum in his locker. Everything has to be either in the dugout or at a podium because of the crush of media. So, those days are big, and you hope that you get a little bit of a lead time that you can prepare for it. but in the outside, those days and those situations are very rare. And the schedule works in the Blue Jays' favor, where at least Vladimania happens at Rogers Center first. It was nuts in Los Angeles, where his dad ultimately, became a Hall of Famer there too, and then going to Texas, where there was a lot of local interest plus the national scape. So you knew it was kind of coming, and it was going to happen fast and furious. And days, at least since then, have gotten a little bit more normal, where they are similarly structured the way that you would normally conduct yourself.
How do you get to him? Like where you need to have the conversation with him because you're Ben Wagner, voice of the Blue Jays, so to speak. How do you get your time so that it's unique to what you guys will produce as opposed to what everybody's going to read everywhere else?
Well, I really haven't changed anything specifically with Vladdy, just like I didn't with Josh Donaldson. If you want an opportunity to talk to the guys, you sense a time where they're going to be available, and you do a little bit by observing too. Are they early afternoon workout guys? Do they usually sit around? Do they play cards early in the afternoon? You get a sense of how they can kind of conduct their day, and you take that opportunity. And sometimes it just falls in your lap, just like in Texas. After the first day media crush on that Friday, Vladdy and me were the only two guys sitting in the dugout in Arlington, Texas. So here's one that's a layup for you, Ben Wagner. Go get it. So, and as much as Vladdy in his own right, uses interpreters and stuff, he's very comfortable in one-on-one conversation without microphones to at least have the amount of it, to have the time and the amount of information that I'm going to ask him about. So I try to carve out time for a lot of individual one-on-one conversation and see where it goes from there. But that's where you have to find it. You have to go out and you have to seek, what makes the players' day comfortable for them. So it's hopefully from a broadcast perspective, it's an easy approach. And I rarely ever ask a media or a PR person to carve out specific time, my own club or even the opposition club. I try to find out what works, within the confines and go from there and approach the person one-on-one. And I think that gets a lot of headway with the players too, that you see them going up for one-on-one communication, whether it was a good day or a bad day. And that's the same way I treat Vladimir Guerrero Jr., the same way that I hopefully treat Tim Meza and, in the coming hours, Edwin Jackson, who has 14 Major League jerseys on his back and has done the gamut of media crush and, kind of flown under the radar. But hopefully I can treat everybody the same.
And, who was the guy who – I don't remember. Who was the guy in Buffalo who was the major leaguer from the Royals? Outfielder? You know what? It's better if we don't use his name, or if it's the guy who, when you ask to interview him, just pulls his pants down and says, "You ready to do it?" That was a good time in Buffalo.
Teachable moment, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look it up now, but for my future safety, in case I run into
I have
him.
an idea. I have an idea who it may or may not have been. Yeah.
I can't remember the name. Let me go big picture, kind of back to where we began, to bring things home a little bit. In general, if we're talking about a baseball broadcast, what is good to you? Like if you turn on the radio, beyond inning, score, who the batter is, what is a differentiator that makes you interested in what you're listening to and that you try to do to keep people locked in?
Well, the score and the inning are ultimately important, right? Where you try to cycle that in as frequently as possible and do it differently. Now, on specifics to your question, I always like to work in how the score happened. If not every half an inning, with the turning points of the game. You can say 4 walks early led to a 3-run lead, and that's where we're at now in the 7th. Or, you can say opponent made a guy really grind early, and that's why starter was knocked out of the game, and they're figuring it out. So you have to have a reason why people who are late tuning into a ball game understand where this game is, because they could, in a lot of instances, not be with you for hours. Think how much action happens in the course of a given day if you miss a couple of hours, let alone just a ball game. So I constantly try to update people of what has happened over the course of a game. And you have to have some sort of human connection, whether it's an at-bat, a story from the player's past, where he got to a current team that he's on, if he's had a lot of travels. Edwin Jackson is a great example where he's had a lot of one-year stints with ball clubs before joining the Blue Jays for actually a second time. So, that's going to be a layer of conversation within the broadcast of that 20 minutes that he was actually a Blue Jay without ever wearing a uniform. I like to have a lot of human interest stuff stacked up on top of, the statistics and where a person ranks. It's great to say this guy had 65 appearances last year. And I think even to a casual baseball fan, that's a lot of work. Sure. But where did it rank in the team? Where did it rank in the American League? Where did it rank in baseball last year? 65 appearances is cool, but did he have a razor-thin earned run average, or did he have an ERA of 6.50? So how are you going to paint it all together? And also then get balls and strikes, balls in play, the score, and the inning, all that tied together. I want a ball game to have rhythm. I want to have a ball game that has a historical reference. I want it to all have present reference, and at the same time, I want to be able to steer everybody together through this wandering 3-hour window that we've got through 27 outs for a ball club, and how today is going to play into tomorrow, and why today is impacted by what happened the day before or the off day for the Blue Jays that got their bullpen right. I think it all should tie together. And I think that's important to where you can have a sense of where a team is within a given series, within a given week, road trip, homestand, whatever have you, and that month in the season. And I think the bigger picture is really important outside just those finite things that you can bring up. And you can also talk about within the broadcast that has a 25-year-old kid going through the ups and downs of his first year in the big leagues. But, his mom is celebrating her 50th birthday, and she got to watch batting practice in Minneapolis, Minnesota for the first time. Those are things you can bring out that your access allows you to bring out because you're there and you're traveling with a ball club.
Ben, if people want to catch the Blue Jays or you on radio or television on any number of outlets that you cover the team, how do they track you down?
Well, the easiest is through the MiLB app. I think anybody that is tuned in stateside and you have access to not only our broadcast but everybody, Sportsnet 590 is the flagship station in Toronto, and we have the reach across an entire country, which not very many teams can say that. But in Canada, on the Sportsnet Radio Network, we have great affiliates that are with us each and every night, border to border to border. And then the MiLB app, sportsnet590.ca, of course, MLB.com, on Twitter, BenWag247. That's me. And the Blue Jays do an awesome job of promoting our broadcast, too. So it's really hard if you have any sort of a Google ability to not find us and our broadcasts.
Awesome. Well, Ben, I know I've got to let you get to the ballpark and get set for tonight with the Giants. I did think of who that player was, by the way, and I'll tell you when we stop recording. But I thank you for hopping on here and being a part of this.
Well, it's great to talk to you, Joel. Thanks so much.
All right, that's Ben Wagner of the Buffalo Bisons. Oh, wow. That's a throwback. That's Ben Wagner of the Toronto Blue Jays joining us. You can find him on social media at BenWag247, and he gave you all the channels to track down the Blue Jays as well. I'm forever grateful for him, to him, for giving me an opportunity, getting my foot in this business professionally with the Bisons. It was a really good year to be with Buffalo, and actually Ben helped get me the connection that got me to the University of South Florida after Buffalo as well. So he's responsible for, in some ways, my first two jobs in this industry. So, and one thing led to another. It all kind of dominoes. A lot goes back to Ben Wagner for me. So many thanks to him for taking the time to be on the pod and for everything he's done for me as well. Give him a shout on Twitter. Again, BenWag247 if you enjoyed the conversation. And let him know what you took away from today. We're back at it next week. I'll be in Avon, Ohio for the Mid-American Conference Baseball Tournament, hopefully with some good results. I'll let you know next Friday morning, right back here on the pod. This is Play-by-Playcast. By the way, you really thought I was getting rid of Marshmallow completely? No, new open. The close is still the same. We're on a 1-week break. See you next Friday. We're out.
And that will do it from St. Louis, where the score is inconclusive.